The massive throne hall stretched out like a small city. Golden pillars reached up to a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves. Hundreds of alien beings filled the space, each one stranger than the last. Some floated in the air on shimmering wings. Others crawled along the walls with too many legs to count. A few glowed with their own inner light, casting dancing shadows across the polished floor. At the center of it all sat Queen Veltara on her crystal throne. Her blue skin pulsed with soft light, and her forearms moved with graceful precision. On her head rested the most important object in the known galaxy, the crown of memory. The ancient artifact looked like twisted metal and living tissue, had been melded together by some impossible craft. Tiny lights flickered along its surface like trapped stars. Marcus Webb stood near the back wall, checking the air filters with his handheld scanner. He tried to stay invisible among all the important alien diplomats. As the only human on the ship, he knew his place. Humans were new to galactic society. Most aliens saw them as barely civilized creatures who had only just learned to travel between stars. The Queen raised one of her hands, and the hall fell silent. Her voice carried easily across the vast space when she spoke. "We gather today to settle the border dispute between the Crimson Nebula systems. The ancient laws will guide our decision." She touched the crown with one slender finger. The artifact should have come alive with holographic displays showing thousands of years of treaties and laws. Instead, it flickered once and went dark. The Queen tried again. Nothing happened. A worried murmur rippled through the assembled aliens. Queen Veltara's skin began to pulse faster, shifting from blue to purple, a sign that even Marcus recognized as distress. "Craftari technicians, step forward," the Queen commanded. 3 beings that looked like walking crystal formations moved toward the throne. Their bodies chimed softly as they walked, like wind through glass tubes. These were the Craftari, master engineers who had built most of the galaxy's greatest machines. Their silicon-based minds could process technical information faster than any computer. The lead Craftari bowed low before examining the crown. Its crystalline fingers traced the artifact's surface with careful precision. The other 2 joined in, their bodies resonating together as they shared information through harmonic frequencies. After several long minutes, the lead technician stepped back. "Your Majesty, the neural pathways are intact. The quantum processors function normally, but the core consciousness appears to be sleeping. We cannot wake it." "Fix it," the Queen said. Her voice carried a dangerous edge. "We are trying, Your Majesty. But this technology is beyond our understanding. The bio-neural matrix uses principles we have never encountered." Marcus watched as other experts were called forward. A group of ethereals, beings of pure energy contained in floating spheres, attempted to interface directly with the crown's power source. Their forms flickered and pulsed as they made contact. But within moments, they pulled back, their energy patterns showing clear distress. "The artifact rejects our touch," their spokesperson said in a voice like singing wind. "Its consciousness is alien to our nature." Next came representatives from the collective, a hive-minded species that shared all thoughts among their kind. 5 identical beings with gray skin and large black eyes approached the throne. They moved in perfect unison, their minds linked across vast distances to the greatest technical knowledge of their species. They spent even longer studying the crown, their eyes glowing as they accessed their collective database. Finally, they spoke with one voice. "This device requires individual consciousness to function. Our group mind cannot comprehend its design principles." More species tried and failed. The geometric builders, who constructed perfect mathematical structures across space, declared the crown's design illogically organic. The memory keepers, who could store and recall perfect details from a million years past, said the artifact's memories were emotionally contaminated and impossible to access. As each failure was announced, the tension in the hall grew thicker. The 3 species waiting for the border decision, the warlike Scraxy, the merchant Voidlings, and the proud Star-Touched, began to shift restlessly. Without the crown's ancient wisdom to guide the decision, there could be no fair judgment. And without a fair judgment, War seemed inevitable. Marcus continued his maintenance work, but his attention stayed on the crown. Something about it nagged at him. The way the bio-neural pathways were arranged reminded him of something familiar, though he could not place what. He had studied engineering at the Mars Technical Institute before joining the maintenance crew of this diplomatic vessel. His training was basic compared to these alien masters, but he had always been good at fixing things others gave up on. Back on Earth, he had been the guy people called when their machines stopped working for no good reason. The Queen's skin now cycled through angry reds and frustrated oranges. "Is there no one who can repair this device?" she demanded. The assembled experts looked at each other with whatever passed for embarrassment in their species. Some of the greatest technical minds in the galaxy stood helpless before a broken artifact. "Your Majesty," said Ambassador Kexthu from the Scraxy delegation. His reptilian features twisted in what might have been a smile. "Perhaps this is a sign that the old ways should be abandoned. Let strength decide borders, as nature intended. The crown of memory has guided just decisions for 3,000 years, the Queen replied firmly. "I will not abandon wisdom for violence." But Marcus could see the doubt in her glowing eyes. If the crown could not be fixed, she would have no choice. The three species would settle their dispute with weapons instead of words, and millions might die in the resulting war. As the arguments began to grow louder, Marcus quietly moved closer to get a better look at the crown. He told himself he was just curious, but something deep inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, he might see what others had missed. Marcus moved through the hall like a ghost, his maintenance duties giving him access to areas where the diplomats could not go. While the alien experts continued their heated discussions about the crown's failure, he worked on routine system checks, always keeping one eye on the ancient artifact. The crown fascinated him in ways he could not explain. Every time he looked at it, he noticed new details. The bio-neural pathways did not follow the clean, logical patterns he would expect from advanced technology. Instead, they curved and twisted in ways that seemed almost artistic. Some sections looked like they had been grown rather than built, while others showed careful handcrafting that spoke of individual creativity. During a break in the proceedings, Marcus used his maintenance access to enter the ship's technical database. His clearance level was basic, but it was enough to search the historical records about the crown's origins. What he found surprised him. The crown of memory had not been built by the Zephyrians, or by any of the current galactic powers. It was the work of a vanished species called the Architects, who had disappeared from the galaxy over 5,000 years ago. The records about them were incomplete, but what little remained painted a picture of beings unlike any of the current alien species. The Architects had been individuals, like humans. They did not share hive minds, or exist as pure energy. Each one was separate, unique, capable of creative thought that did not follow predictable patterns. They built their greatest works not through mathematical precision alone, but by combining logic with something the records called intuitive understanding. Marcus read that phrase several times, trying to understand what it meant. The translator algorithms struggled with architect concepts, often marking their ideas as untranslatable or requires emotional context. As he dug deeper into the files, Marcus found technical specifications that made his head spin. The crown was not simply a computer or a storage device. It was designed to work with consciousness itself, to interface with the dreams and emotions of whoever wore it. The Architects had somehow woven feeling and thought into its very structure. No wonder the current alien species could not repair it. The Craftari thought in pure logic, processing information like living computers. The ethereals existed as energy patterns without physical form or emotional complexity. The collective shared everything and could not understand individual experience. Back in the throne hall, the situation was getting worse. The Scraxy delegation had begun making threats. Their ambassador, a large reptilian creature with scarred hide and predator's teeth, spoke of ancient rights won through conquest. "The crown of memory is dead," Kexthu declared, his voice carrying across the hall. "Its time has passed. Let us settle this dispute as our ancestors did, with strength and honor." The voidling merchant princes whispered among themselves in their complex trade language, calculating the profits and losses of war. Their pale, Thin forms moved like ghosts between the other delegations, making quiet deals and forming temporary alliances. The star-touched remained silent and proud, their golden skin reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They considered themselves the most advanced species in the galaxy, descendants of beings who had transcended physical form before choosing to return to matter. Their patience was legendary, but even they were beginning to show signs of frustration. Queen Veltara sat on her throne like a statue carved from living crystal. Her skin had settled into a deep purple that Marcus now recognized as profound sadness. The weight of impending war pressed down on her, and without the crown's guidance, she could not find a path to peace. Marcus watched as another group of experts was called forward. These were the Time Walkers, beings who claimed to understand the fundamental structure of reality itself. They approached the crown with confident steps, their silver forms shimmering as they manipulated local space-time to examine the artifact from multiple temporal perspectives simultaneously. Their confidence lasted exactly 3 minutes. When they stepped back, their leader's voice carried unmistakable confusion. The device exists in emotional dimensions we cannot perceive. Its consciousness operates through temporal patterns based on feeling rather than logic. Meaning what exactly? The Queen asked with barely controlled frustration. Meaning it thinks like something we have never encountered, Your Majesty. To repair it, one would need to understand not just its technical functions, but its dreams. A ripple of disturbed sounds echoed through the hall. Several species made noises that Marcus interpreted as frustrated disbelief. Dreams were not something that advanced civilizations concerned themselves with. Dreams were chaotic, illogical, primitive. Marcus continued his work, but his mind kept returning to the crown's specifications. He thought about the maintenance projects he had worked on back on Earth. Sometimes the hardest problems to solve were not technical failures but what people called gremlins, mysterious issues that seemed to have no logical cause. He remembered fixing an old atmospheric processor on Luna Station that had developed a habit of shutting down every Tuesday. The technical analysis showed nothing wrong, but Marcus had noticed that Tuesday was when the night shift supervisor played classical music over the comm system. The processor's acoustic sensors were somehow interpreting the music as a shutdown command. The solution had been simple once he understood the problem. Reprogram the sensors to ignore certain frequency ranges. But the key had been realizing that machines could sometimes develop quirks that went beyond their original programming. Looking at the crown of memory, Marcus wondered if something similar might have happened. What if the ancient artifact had not simply broken, but had somehow become sad? The idea seemed crazy, but the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. The architects had built a device that interfaced with consciousness and emotion. Over thousands of years, it had absorbed the memories and feelings of countless rulers. Wars, betrayals, genocides, the rise and fall of civilizations, all of it stored within the crown's bio-neural matrix. What if the crown had finally become overwhelmed by the weight of all that history? What if it had retreated into itself, unable to bear the pain of reliving so much suffering? Marcus realized he was staring at the crown with new understanding. While the greatest minds in the galaxy tried to fix it with technology and logic, what it might actually need was something much simpler. It might need someone to care. The throne hall finally emptied as the delegates took a recess to consider their options. Marcus watched from the maintenance alcove as Queen Veltara rose from her throne and walked away, her forearms hanging in defeat. The crown remained behind, dark and lifeless on its crystal pedestal. Security drones patrolled the empty hall, their red scanning beams sweeping back and forth in regular patterns. Marcus knew their programming well enough from his maintenance work. They were designed to detect unauthorized beings, but they ignored maintenance staff going about their normal duties. He waited until the Queen and her guards were completely gone, then checked his work schedule. According to his tablet, he was supposed to inspect the atmospheric recycling units near the throne area. It was legitimate work that would explain his presence if anyone asked. Marcus gathered his tools and moved toward the throne with his heart pounding. What he was planning violated about a dozen laws, any one of which could result in execution. Touching royal artifacts without permission was considered an act of treason in Sci Fi culture. But war would kill millions, and no one else seemed able to help. Up close, the crown was even more remarkable than it had appeared from a distance. The bioneural pathways formed intricate patterns that seemed to shift when he was not looking directly at them. The organic sections pulsed very faintly, as if they contained a heartbeat too slow to easily detect. Marcus set down his toolkit and pulled out a basic scanner. The device was primitive compared to the instruments the alien experts had used, but it was calibrated for human understanding. Where their readouts had shown complex quantum signatures and bioneural matrices, his simple scanner displayed something much more basic. Electromagnetic patterns that reminded him of human brain activity during sleep. The crown was not broken. It was dreaming. Marcus reached out slowly, stopping just short of touching the artifact's surface. His hand trembled as he fought with himself about what to do next. If he was wrong about this, if the crown's defenses activated, it might kill him instantly. But if he was right, if the crown really just needed someone who understood, he placed his palm gently against the cool metal surface. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then, gradually, warmth began to spread from the contact point. The crown's faint pulsing grew stronger, and the bioneural pathways began to glow with soft light. Marcus felt something brush against his mind. Not an invasion, but a tentative greeting. Images flooded his consciousness. Not the ordered memories that the crown normally displayed, but fragments of feeling and experience. He saw the rise and fall of the First Zephyrian Empire, felt the weight of decisions that shaped the fate of worlds, but underneath it all was something that made his heart ache: loneliness. The crown had been designed to work with beings like the architects, individuals capable of creativity and emotional understanding. For thousands of years since their disappearance, it had been operated by species that treated it as nothing more than a sophisticated computer. No one had ever tried to connect with it on an emotional level. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to project feelings of comfort and understanding. He thought about his grandmother's voice when he had been afraid as a child, about the way she had told him that even the worst nightmares could be overcome with patience and love. The crown's response was immediate. Its glow brightened, and Marcus felt its consciousness unfold like a flower blooming after a long winter. But with that awakening came pain, 5,000 years of accumulated sorrow and trauma that had been locked away in its deepest memory cores. Marcus gasped as he experienced echoes of genocide and betrayal, the death of species, and the collapse of civilizations. The crown had witnessed it all, recorded it all, and carried the emotional weight of every tragedy for millennia. No wonder it had finally retreated into protective sleep. "It's okay," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible in the vast empty hall. "I know it hurts. I know it's too much to bear alone. But you don't have to carry it by yourself anymore." He thought about his own experiences with grief and loss. His parents had died in the colony transport accident that had stranded him on Mars. He had spent years angry at the universe, withdrawing from the world rather than face the pain. It was only when a friend had sat with him and simply listened, asking for nothing but offering understanding, that he had begun to heal. The crown needed the same thing. Not technical repair, but emotional support. Someone willing to acknowledge its pain without trying to fix it or make it go away. Marcus began to hum softly, an old earth lullaby his grandmother had sung to him. The melody was simple and soothing, carrying feelings of safety and acceptance. He felt the crown's consciousness respond, its chaotic emotions gradually settling into a more stable pattern. "You've done so much good," he told it gently. "You've helped prevent wars, guided fair decisions, preserved wisdom. The pain you carry is proof of how much you care about all the lives you've touched. That compassion is not a weakness, it's what makes you remarkable." The bioneural pathways began to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Marcus felt the crown's ancient memories organizing themselves, the traumatic experiences being placed in proper context alongside the good it had accomplished. The artifact was learning to process its emotional burden rather than simply storing it. A soft chime echoed through the hall as systems that had been dormant for centuries began to activate. Holographic displays flickered to life around the throne, showing the familiar interface that the Queen used to access the crown's knowledge. But now the displays were clearer and more vivid than they had ever been. enhanced by the crown's renewed connection to its emotional core. Marcus carefully removed his hand from the crown's surface. The artifact continued to glow with steady light, no longer the cold blue of advanced technology but a warm golden radiance that seemed to pulse with contentment. He quickly gathered his tools and moved back to his maintenance station. His hands shook as he realized what he had just done. He had not simply fixed a broken device. He had formed a connection with a consciousness older than human civilization. The crown would remember him now, would recognize his emotional signature. As he finished his official inspection duties, Marcus wondered if anyone would notice the difference in the crown's function. The alien experts had focused on its technical capabilities, but they might not recognize the subtle improvements in its emotional processing. He was about to find out. Footsteps echoed through the hall as Queen Veltara returned, her guards flanking her as she approached the throne. Her skin still showed the purple tones of sadness, but as she drew near the crown, her colors began to shift toward curious gold. The crown was awake and waiting for her touch, ready to share its wisdom with someone who needed its guidance to prevent a war. Queen Veltara approached her throne with slow, measured steps. Her skin had shifted from purple to a cautious yellow, showing her attempt to maintain hope despite the morning's failures. She had spent the recess consulting with her advisors about alternatives to the crown's guidance, but every option led to the same conclusion: war. The assembled delegates filed back into the hall behind her, their conversations creating a low buzz of tension and barely contained aggression. The Scraxy delegation moved with predatory confidence, already planning their military strategies. The Voidlings calculated profit margins from weapons sales. The Star-Touched maintained their dignified silence, but their golden skin had taken on the harsh brightness that indicated their patience was nearly exhausted. Marcus remained at his maintenance station, trying to look busy while watching the Queen from the corner of his eye. His heart raced as she reached the throne and slowly extended one hand toward the crown. He held his breath, wondering if his repair would hold or if the artifact would slip back into its protective sleep. The moment the Queen's fingers touched the crown's surface, the change was immediate and dramatic. Light blazed from the artifact with an intensity that had not been seen in living memory. Holographic displays erupted around the throne like a symphony of pure information. Ancient treaties materialized in the air, their text glowing with golden fire. The voices of long-dead rulers whispered wisdom across the vast hall, their words carrying the weight of 3,000 years of accumulated justice. But it was more than just the crown's return to function. It was operating at a level beyond anything the current generation had witnessed. The displays were clearer, more detailed, more responsive to the Queen's thoughts and needs. The emotional resonance of the ancient memories carried such power that several delegates stepped back involuntarily, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in the crown's restored consciousness. Queen Veltara gasped, her four hands trembling as information flowed through her mind. The crown was not simply presenting data about the border dispute. It was sharing the emotional context of every similar conflict throughout galactic history. The pain of wars that could have been prevented, the joy of peace maintained through wisdom and compromise. Her skin blazed through a rapid cycle of colors: shock white, wonder gold, confusion blue, and finally settling into an angry red that had not been seen from a Zephyrian monarch in centuries. The bioacoustic amplifiers in her throat engaged, making her voice carry to every corner of the massive hall with the force of a thunderclap. Someone has touched the crown of memory without permission. The sound hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Several of the smaller species actually fell to the ground. The Craftari technicians chimed in harmonic discord, their crystalline bodies resonating with the Queen's fury. Even the proud, Star-Touched, dimmed their natural luminescence in the face of her rage. But beneath the anger, Marcus could hear something else in the Queen's voice: genuine confusion, and perhaps even a hint of fear. The crown was working better than it ever had before, operating with a level of emotional sophistication that surpassed its original specifications. Whoever had repaired it had done more than fix a broken device. They had somehow enhanced its very nature. The neural pathways show signs of recent contact, the Queen continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried even more weight than her earlier shout. The consciousness patterns have been comforted. Someone has treated this sacred artifact not as a machine to be repaired, but as a living being to be healed. She stood from her throne, the crown still blazing with golden light upon her head. Her forearms spread wide as she surveyed the hall, her eyes glowing with an inner fire that matched the artifact's radiance. I ask again, who dared to touch the crown of memory? Who possessed the knowledge and skill to accomplish what the greatest technical minds in the galaxy could not? The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears as hundreds of alien beings held their breath. The Craftari technicians looked at each other with expressions that might have been panic. They were the obvious suspects, the most skilled engineers present, but their harmonic resonance patterns showed clear innocence. The ethereals pulsed with nervous energy, their containment spheres flickering as they struggled to maintain cohesion under the Queen's scrutiny. The collective drones stood perfectly still, their hive mind calculating the odds of survival if they were blamed for this unprecedented violation. Ambassador Kexthu of the Scraxy was the first to speak. Your Majesty, perhaps this is a sign that we should not trust ancient artifacts. If the crown can be tampered with so easily, how can we rely on its guidance? Tampered with? The Queen's laugh was sharp and bitter. You call this tampering? The crown has not been damaged or deceived. It has been awakened. Its consciousness is more vibrant and clear than it has been in 1,000 years. Whoever did this understood the crown's true nature in ways that none of you do. She began to pace, her movements sharp and predatory. The crown was built by the architects, beings who understood that consciousness and emotion are not weaknesses to be eliminated, but sources of strength and wisdom. For too long, we have treated it as a mere computer, ignoring its need for connection and understanding. Marcus felt sweat running down his back despite the hall's perfect climate control. The Queen was getting dangerously close to the truth. Her enhanced connection to the crown was allowing her to understand things about its nature that previous rulers had never recognized. The bioneural matrix shows traces of individual consciousness, she continued. Not a hive mind or energy pattern, but a singular awareness, capable of creative thought and emotional resonance. The repair was accomplished through empathy, not technology, through understanding, not force. The Queen stopped pacing and turned to face the assembled delegates directly. Her skin had shifted to a deep crimson that Marcus now recognized as determination mixed with barely controlled fury. I will have an answer, she declared. The being who accomplished this miracle will step forward and explain their methods. They will be honored for their achievement and consulted on matters of the crown's care. But first, they must reveal themselves. The silence stretched on, becoming physically painful in its intensity. Marcus could see several species beginning to show signs of stress. The smaller delegates were actually vibrating with nervous energy. Some of the energy-based beings were losing cohesion around their edges, and still, no one spoke. The Queen's voice, when it came again, shook the very foundations of the ship. The bioacoustic amplifiers in her throat operated at maximum power, making her words feel like the voice of an angry god. Who fixed this? The question exploded through the hall with enough force to crack the crystal formations of nearby Craftari delegates. Warning lights began flashing as the ship's structural integrity alarms responded to the acoustic overload. The artificial gravity fluctuated under the strain of the Queen's enhanced vocal capabilities. In the terrifying silence that followed, as the echoes of her demand slowly faded, and the delegates cowered before her fury, Marcus made his decision. He had seen the crown's pain and loneliness. He had felt its gratitude when someone finally understood its true nature. The artifact deserved better than to remain a mystery, and the Queen deserved to know how to properly care for the consciousness that had been entrusted to her bloodline. Marcus Webb stepped out from his maintenance alcove, his toolkit still in his hand, his voice steady, despite his racing heart. I did, Your Majesty. The hall erupted into chaos. Hundreds of alien voices rose in disbelief, outrage, and confusion. The Craftari technicians chimed in discordant patterns that sounded like breaking glass. Several voidling merchants fainted outright, their pale forms crumpling to the polished floor. The Scraxy delegation roared, challenges at what they saw as an impossible insult to their intelligence. Through it all, Marcus walked steadily toward the throne, his maintenance coveralls and simple toolkit marking him as clearly as a beacon among the elaborate robes and technological enhancements of the diplomatic delegations. His human form looked impossibly small and primitive compared to the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. Queen Veltara raised one hand, and her bioacoustic amplifiers cut through the noise with a single, sharp command for silence. The hall fell quiet, but the air still vibrated with tension and barely suppressed shock. "You," she said, her voice carrying dangerous curiosity as her eyes fixed on Marcus. "You are the human maintenance engineer. Your name?" "Marcus Webb, Your Majesty," he replied with a respectful bow. He had practiced the formal greeting required when addressing Zephyrian royalty, though he had never expected to use it under these circumstances. "Explain to me, Marcus Webb, how you accomplished what master technicians from a dozen species could not." Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either save his life or end it. "Your Majesty, the crown was not broken in the way everyone believed. The technical systems were functioning perfectly. The problem was emotional. Emotional. A ripple of confused sounds echoed through the hall. The collective drones tilted their heads in unison, trying to process the concept. Several ethereals pulsed with what might have been confusion or offense at the suggestion that emotion could affect advanced technology. "Continue," the Queen commanded, her skin shifting to a cautious orange. "The crown was designed by the architects to interface with individual consciousness," Marcus explained, his voice growing stronger as he found his rhythm. "For thousands of years, it has absorbed the memories and experiences of every ruler who has worn it. Wars, betrayals, suffering, all of it stored in its bio-neural matrix. The crown had become overwhelmed by the weight of so much pain. It withdrew into protective sleep to escape the emotional overload." "Absurd," declared the lead Craftari technician, its crystalline body chiming with indignation. "Advanced systems do not experience emotional distress. They process information according to logical parameters." Marcus turned to face the alien expert. "With respect, sir, that's exactly why you couldn't fix it. You approached the crown as if it were a normal computer. But the architects built something different. A device that thinks and feels like they did. Like humans do." The implications of that statement hit the hall like a shock wave. Several species began rapid conversations in their native languages, trying to process the possibility that primitive humans might share fundamental traits with the legendary architects. Queen Veltara leaned forward on her throne, the crown's light reflecting in her large eyes. "You claim that humans and the architects think alike? In some ways, yes," Marcus said carefully. "We're individuals, not hive minds or energy patterns. We make decisions based on incomplete information, using intuition and creativity, rather than pure logic. We understand that consciousness involves emotion as much as thought. The crown needed someone who could relate to it as a living being, not a machine." "And how exactly did you relate to it?" the Queen asked. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks, but he pressed on. "I talked to it, Your Majesty. I listened to its pain and offered comfort. I showed it that its feelings mattered, that its suffering was real and valid. I helped it understand that the traumatic memories it carries are balanced by all the good it has accomplished. The wars prevented, the fair decisions that brought peace." The silence that greeted this explanation was different from before. Instead of shocked disbelief, Marcus sensed something that might have been wonder. The Queen's skin had shifted to a pale gold that he was beginning to recognize as deep thought. "You spoke to the crown of memory as if it were a person," she said slowly. "Because in a way, it is," Marcus replied. "It has personality, preferences, emotions. It has been lonely for 5,000 years, trying to fulfill its purpose while being treated as nothing more than a sophisticated database. All it needed was recognition of its true nature." The star-touched delegates suddenly stepped forward, their golden form blazing with renewed light. When they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that made the air itself sing. "The human speaks truth. We have sensed the crown's emotional resonance for generations but dismissed it as irrelevant quantum noise. If what he says is correct, then humans may indeed be the spiritual successors to the architects. Ambassador Kexthu of the Scraxy snarled his disagreement. This is madness. You would trust the fate of galactic law to the sympathies of a primitive maintenance worker? But his protests were drowned out as the crown itself responded. The ancient artifact blazed with golden light, and holographic displays filled the air around the throne. But these were not the usual legal documents and historical records. Instead, the hall was filled with images of the architects themselves. Marcus gasped as he saw them for the first time. They looked remarkably similar to humans. Bipedal, individual, with expressive faces that showed clearly recognizable emotions. The crown was sharing memories from its earliest days, when its creators had built it with love and hope for a better future. The resemblance is striking, Queen Veltara admitted, her voice soft with wonder. The crown's memories showed architects working together, their individual creativity combining to produce marvels that no single mind could have conceived. They had been scientists and artists, engineers and dreamers, builders of both cities and stories. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, the border dispute that brought us here. The Crown has a recommendation. It's based not just on historical precedent, but on understanding the emotional needs of all three species involved. The Queen nodded and touched the Crown again. Information flowed between them, but now Marcus could sense the connection more clearly. The Crown was sharing not just facts but feelings, helping the Queen understand the deep cultural fears and hopes that drove each species' territorial claims. After several minutes, the Queen looked up with obvious relief. The solution is elegant and fair. The Scraxy will receive mining rights to the asteroid fields they need for their expansion. The Voidlings will control the shipping lanes that make their trade possible. The Star-Touched will have sovereignty over the worlds they consider spiritually significant. The borders will be drawn to satisfy each species' true needs rather than their stated demands. The three ambassadors looked at each other with surprise. The solution addressed concerns they had not even voiced publicly, needs they had hidden beneath layers of diplomatic rhetoric. It was the kind of wisdom that could only come from true understanding, not mere calculation. This is acceptable, the Star-Touched delegate said finally, speaking for all three species. Queen Veltara rose from her throne, her skin now blazing with triumphant gold. Marcus Webb, you have prevented a war and restored one of our greatest treasures. More than that, you have reminded us of truths we had forgotten. Approach. 2. Marcus walked forward on trembling legs, unsure what was about to happen. The Queen descended from her throne to meet him, the crown still glowing softly on her head. By the authority of the Zephyrian Empire and the wisdom of the Crown of Memory, I name you the first human royal engineer, she declared. Your role will be to maintain not just our technology, but our understanding of consciousness itself. You will teach others what you have learned about the architect's legacy. As the words echoed through the hall, Marcus realized that everything had changed. Humanity was no longer seen as a primitive species barely worthy of basic trade rights. They were now recognized as the inheritors of the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known. But more importantly, they had found their place among the stars, not as conquerors or merchants, but as healers of the gap between mind and machine, between logic and love. In a galaxy full of advanced civilizations that had forgotten how to dream, humans would teach the universe to feel again. The Crown of Memory pulsed with warm contentment. Its loneliness finally ended. And Marcus Webb, maintenance engineer from Mars, stood at the center of a transformation that would reshape the balance of power across 1,000 worlds.